Hey guys, welcome to the channel. In today's video we are talking about Final Fantasy 16. But before we get started, if you guys are new and seeing my content for the first time, I play and review games, and I purchase every game that I play, so whether the game is good or bad, I give you guys my honest opinion. So if you guys like what you see, hit the subscribe button and drop a like on the video. I'm gonna try and keep this video as spoiler free as I can. There are a few things that I do want to talk about that some might deem in spoiler territory, so here's your warning now. I think the story is absolutely incredible, and I loved every minute of it. There are so many parts that were really gripping and more or less had me at the edge of my seat of just how crazy and epic that the story turns into. It's very much like Game of Thrones-y, which I've heard that term thrown around quite a bit, and I actually tend to agree with it. It has a lot of similarities to Game of Thrones. You play as Clive Rosfield, who is the shield and sworn protector of his younger brother Joshua, who is the heir to the throne and the icon of fire. And I personally really like how that they handled the summons in this game. Instead of summoning them with materia like you do in Final Fantasy VII, there are people called Dominates who have the ability to turn into one of the 8 icons. These icons are the most powerful things in the world, and a lot of these kingdoms use these icons to wage war against one another. You start out with Clive as a young boy, and you follow his story all throughout his adult life. Clive is a bearer, which is a person with magical powers not blessed with an icon, and are able to use magic without having to use a crystal. For the most part, bearers in the game are seen as cursed and like low lifes, and are usually branded with a tattoo marking on their cheek and are used as slaves. Clive was fortunate enough to be born into a royal family, but despite that, he was still very much hated and looked down upon by others and even his own mother. And his mother absolutely despised bearers slash branded. But the story really kicks off when Clive, Joshua, and his family are ambushed and all massacred at Phoenix Gate, resulting in the fall of Rosaria and the death of Clive's father, who is the Archduke of Rosaria. This is also where Clive awakens the second icon of fire, Ifrit, and loses control and kills literally everybody, including his brother Joshua. And this leaves Clive as the sole survivor of Phoenix Gate. And skipping some very important spoilery details, Clive gets older and he realizes that the mother crystals are what's poisoning the land and sets off with a group of friends to destroy all of the mother crystals. And I mean, just like it's kind of hard to explain like the entire story of Game of Thrones, it's kind of hard to explain what the entire story of Final Fantasy 16. There's just so many things that are happening over a large span of time, and it's just kind of hard to put it all together. We can talk like another hour about this and still not even finish. The game does have a really cool feature though, where you can hold down the touchpad on the DualSense controller and it brings up a time of events type menu where you can see characters, things that have happened, so that way if you are confused or don't understand what happened, you can pull that up, see what's happening. And it was really cool to see because there's been a few times where I wasn't quite paying attention. I was like, wait, what just happened? Pulled that up and it was really helpful. And like I said in the beginning, the story is just so freaking good. I loved it so much. I won't go into any more details because that was probably as vague as I can make it, but the story gets really good, and I don't want to spoil it for anybody that still has yet to play Final Fantasy 16. The game also has a huge cast of characters, all of which were really great. All of them were really well voiced. That they did a wonderful job actually voice acting. A lot of it was really good, especially Clive. I thought Clive's voice actor was really good. I also really liked Sid. Sid is another great character, and Clive's uncle Byron. Both of those characters were absolutely hilarious, and just not even just them, but all of the characters together, Jill, Clive, Sid, they all did such a great job and really elevated their characters. Just like the story, the gameplay here is also S tier. Clive originally starts out only being able to wield a sword and a few little powers that he got because he had the Phoenix Blessing, which means that he could use a few of the Phoenix's powers, which was Joshua, but he wasn't able to fully transform into the Phoenix, making him not an icon. Every time Clive defeats another Dominant, he takes their power. It kind of reminds me of Attack on Titan, where like Eren is taking in all of the Titans into himself, and gains more, powers and abilities that way. The combat overall was very fast and fluid and was super fun. Doing things like parrying would slow down time to where you can get a ton of hits in. Also, if you did a precision dodge where you just perfectly dodged at the right time, you can counter with an immediate strike, doing even more damage. A lot of the bigger enemies all had posture meters, and when you hit that thing all the way down to 0, it would stun them for quite a few seconds to where you could just dump all of your abilities. Some of my top favorite abilities that Clive gets, one of them is the Giga Flare from Bahamut. It just looked super cool, super epic. Plus, it's one of the most powerful moves in the game. Titan's Windup was also a really cool one, where you would hold down and charge it up and you could deal 2 super powerful punches. And the more recent one I started experimenting with was Odin's Arm of Darkness, which swipes your blade with Odin's, and if you can get enough hits in to charge that all the way up, it'll deal a ton of crazy damage, and it looks really cool and flashy. I do have to say that no matter which attack that you used, that you had like one of these icon abilities, they all looked really cool. They're super flashy, super epic. Even some of the ones that I didn't really use all that much. For example, I wasn't a big fan of Garuda, so once I got enough abilities, I kind of swapped out Garuda's abilities, but even Garuda's abilities looked really cool. The game also has a huge variety of enemies. I feel like every time I went to a new area, there's a whole new list of enemies that I would be encountering. Constantly kept the game fresh, always fighting new things, plus you're getting the new abilities at a good progression, so I always felt like I was getting stronger and stronger and more powerful. You also have your dog Torgal with you that can help you in battles. You have like semi-control over him. He does like 2 attacks. He'll do his standard bite attack, one that launches, enemies up into the air, and he can heal you. He pretty much just attacks whatever enemy you're currently locked onto, which is pretty helpful. As you go throughout the game, you do have other companions that are with you. Sid and some other ones. I won't, go into spoilers here. They do help you in battles, and they do damage to enemies. Unfortunately, you don't get to control them like you do in, say, like Final Fantasy VII. They do help you in battle and do pull aggro away from a lot of enemies, so you're not just getting swarmed by a ton. Last thing that I want to talk about on the combat is the semi-priming, I believe it's what it's called, where Clive doesn't fully transform into Ifrit, but he gets a lot of Ifrit's features. He gets crazy icon-looking arms, and he's totally on fire. Plus, he does a ton more damage. He has fire all over him. His sword's on fire. While you're in this primed state, in this mode, you do more damage. It doesn't seem like you could be staggered or knocked down, allowing you to just continually dish out attacks. With that, though, you still do take damage in this mode, although you do get a little bit of health regain. I'm not exactly sure how this works. I don't know if it's the number of hits that happen or if it's just the longer you're in the mode, the more you can heal. But I've noticed that while I was in this semi-prime state, I did get a little bit of health. Not a lot, but it was enough to where if I ran out of potions or something like that, it would really save me and I wouldn't have to die or start over, especially in those crazy boss fights. Speaking of which, the boss fights in this game are freaking insane. All the main story bosses are very cinematic, very epic, and just freaking crazy and fun. Especially the music. I haven't touched on the music just yet, but real quick, the music is freaking fire. As far as like the main boss fights go, typically you started out semi-priming Clive and whoever he is fighting. I forget, Kupka. They both go, semi-prime, they fight for a little bit, and then it just escalates from there. Next thing you know, they're both in their icon forms as 2 giant titans fighting each other. Every time I beat a boss fight, I was like, there's just no way that it gets better than this. And every single time, it either got better than the last boss fight or was just as crazy as the previous boss fight. Every single one was just so crazy and over-the-top epic. Easily one of my favorite parts of Final Fantasy XVI. None of the bosses were particularly hard. Specifically the main story bosses, I didn't find any of them too hard. Although I did die once on Odin and once on the very last boss fight, which I won't spoil here. But they weren't like super difficult. It was just more me being reckless and not really paying attention to my health at the time, but man, they were all so much fun. Along with all of the main story bosses, which were mostly the icon bosses, there are quite a few other bosses that they do have in the game. They just weren't as big and crazy and over the top as the icon boss fights. Specifically, later in the game, you do get access to the hunt board, which is a bunch of enemies, beasts, things like that you can hunt down and defeat, and they're all, I don't want to say mini bosses, but they're all optional bosses. In fact, a lot of the optional bosses that are in here are some of the toughest in the game. For example, there's some dragon that I fought and it killed me like 2 or 3 times before I was able to best it. I ran into some A-level like ninja dude fairly early on and it stomped my butt quite a few times. There is difficulty, it's just not in the main story. A lot of these really hard bosses, I wouldn't even say that they were really hard, but they were the harder bosses, were all the optional bosses. Out of the icon fights, I would say that my favorite icon fight was probably against Ifrit. That one was super epic and I loved the story behind it. It was very much like a pivotal story moment as well. So I won't spoil too much here, but the Ifrit fight was freaking awesome and epic. And probably my favorite non-icon boss fight was either the Behemoth boss fight, which is towards the end, or the Vrog? I don't know. It was some giant dragon. That's one of the S tier on the hunt boards. That one was also a lot of fun to fight as well. Personally, I think some of these boss fights, especially the icon boss fights, were some of the coolest and most epic boss fights that we've had in gaming in such a long time. They were just so epic. My only complaint that I have with the boss fight and kind of the combat in general is that the game felt a little, I don't want to say easy, but it didn't feel challenging. The bosses were fairly easy. Like I said, I didn't die to any of the main story bosses minus the last 2, which Odin was pretty close to the end, and then the final boss, and I only died once to each of them. But for the most part, they weren't really challenging, and I just wish that they were just a tad bit more difficult. Maybe that you would have to use your abilities in a more methodical way, a more thought out way, instead of just, DPS dumping. It was still really fun. You felt really powerful. It was nice and smooth, but I just wish it was just a tad bit more difficult. Final Fantasy XVI takes place in the world of Valisthea. I can't say that word. Which in itself has many different regions, all with their own different biomes. You got a desert area, very vegetatious tree forest type area. From there to literally ruins and destroyed castles. The game looked really beautiful. I loved all the set pieces. This has been kind of said before, so I feel like this is common knowledge, but the game isn't open world, even though it does very much look like it. It's just big open zones that gradually open over time. A lot of it's locked off until you get further into story progression, but once you get to the end game, everything's unlocked and you see that there are basically 4 or 5 just big major zones. They're big enough that you can explore, find some treasures, but not overly big where it feels like you're just running around the whole time. I kind of think of them similar to like the new God of War Ragnarok, very similar to that. I mentioned this earlier, but the game looks incredible. The graphics here were top notch. All of the fight scenes, all of the set pieces, all of it, all of the enemy designs, all looked really good. The game also has a ton of side quests, and I did all of them. Every side quest I got, I did them. For the most part, most of the side quests all helped build the world of Valisthea more, let you understand what's going on in this huge world. There's more that's going on than just Clive and his little party. Now, the side quests themselves, some of them were really fun and some of them were just not really fun. Like, you're just speeding through to get through it. But I will have to say that all of the side quests that had to do with your main set of characters or the ones that directly interacted with the main characters were all, for the most part, fairly fun. Overall, I felt this game was really well polished. I didn't run into any glitches or bugs at all. I didn't have any game crashes. The game ran smooth. The graphics were amazing. I will have to say, though, that the frame rate did drop quite a bit. I noticed it more when I was in the open zone type areas. Anytime I was in like a boss fight or it did the cutscene and then you go directly into a boss fight, for the most part, 60 frames through and through, especially on a lot of those boss fights. But like I said, it's really more those big open zones. And it wasn't like tank all the way down to like 12 or something like that. But you could definitely tell that it was not 60 frames. Other than that, the game ran perfect the entire time. I had no issues, and although I wish the frame rate was stuck at a solid 60, it's not going to make or break the game. Going into my final thoughts here. Final Fantasy XVI literally blew away like all my expectations. I personally thought it was awesome. I freaking loved it. I loved the combat. It was fast, fluid, and fun. The icon bites were they were so freaking awesome. I don't even have like words to describe. Just like they put a lot of thought and effort and passion into these boss fights. They were just incredible. They looked awesome. The music was fire. You just felt cool taking down these giant Titan bosses. The story was also really good. Like, I don't want to spoil it here for anyone who hasn't played the game, but man, the story was really good. With all those things together, that is why I'm going to give Final Fantasy XVI a 10 out of 10. This game was absolutely incredible. With a year just jam-packed full of just bangers after bangers, like, this is literally my favorite game that I've played thus far this year. I know there's quite a few games that are still coming up, but this blew away my expectations. I was not expecting to love it this much. I had a feeling that it was going to be good, but man, this was on another level. I absolutely recommend this game to anyone who has a PlayStation 5. This is a must-play game. If you don't have it yet, go buy it. It is awesome. And that's going to be it for today's video, guys. Let me know down in the comments what you guys thought of Final Fantasy XVI. And if you guys made it this far, you're awesome. I appreciate the support. If you enjoyed the video, be sure to subscribe to the channel, drop a like on the video, and we'll see you guys on the next video.